All right, let's get started. We got a lot of things to cover here, and I just have a few minutes. First of all, we're going to go through China, USMCA, a few other things here. First of all, let's talk about China a little bit. I know none of you care about that topic at all.
There's been no discussion
about that. Haven't spent any time on that. As a matter of fact, Constance, I will tell you that I think if Vice Minister Han Jun's count is right, and I don't know, Ted, you and I have lost track, but I think we have now officially sat down in 20 negotiating sessions between he and I.
You've gone through a lot of tea.
That takes a lot of time. We have spent an enormous amount of time together in the last several months. And I want to start this conversation to kind of put this in context and help you understand. How many of you can tell me what China's total ag imports were last year? Dan can, because I got the number from him. Don't tell anybody. No, they were, actually I didn't. I got this number from somebody else. $124 billion. To put that in context, total U.S. ag exports last year were 145. So in a good year, in a normal year, China's our best market at about 20 billion. And my point is simply that 20 out of 124 just isn't going to cut it. That's not even close, given the capacity of U.S. agriculture to export things. So what seems to be the problem here? And what is the conversation? We're talking about structural issues and having the conversation. Yes, we export over $13 billion worth of soybeans to China in any given year, but let's go down through this. Wheat, corn, and rice. We've never exported any rice to China until recently. We got some things sorted out here. In wheat and corn, we have two of the biggest WTO cases in history in agriculture that we can now talk about publicly. First one is on domestic subsidies. China made some changes on corn, but in terms of wheat and rice, China exceeded what it was allowed to do by somewhere in the neighborhood of about $84 billion. $84 billion. In terms of beef, pork, and poultry, it took us 15 years to get a thimbleful of beef into China. We have some pork access, but we have the ractopamine issue that we all know about in animal agriculture, and we don't have any access on poultry. So here's the context on poultry to give you a number. I just looked this up the other day, it just came out. In March, China imported, in beef, pork, and poultry, $965 million in 1 month of beef, pork, and poultry. How much did the U.S. do of that business? $35 million. Folks, that ain't going to cut it by any stretch of the imagination. We have got to get going here. We have got an enormous amount of work to do with one of the biggest importers of agricultural products on the planet. China bought $5 billion in beef last year. We did, what, 60 million of that. There are so many things that have to be fixed. On dairy, there's an enormous number of issues that we have to be fixed. Ethanol, distillers' grains, enormous opportunity there. And one of my favorites, and Nancy's back here somewhere, is pet food. We can't even sell China pet food. That's a $400 million market minimum. So these conversations, so much time and effort has been put into these topics to see if we can resolve this. This is critically important, folks. This is the kind of things that we're working on. On these WTO cases, we have China never met or fulfilled 9.6 million tons of wheat, 7.2 million tons of corn, 5.3 million tons of rice. That's roughly $3.5 billion a year that they need to be buying of those three commodities from somebody in the world. They hadn't reported to the WTO what their subsidies were since 2012, until here just a few months ago. While I'm on there, so that's quickly on China.
I just was wondering if you're actually feeling pretty passionate about that, Greg.
Yeah, I don't know haven't spent any time on that topic. But let's parlay that into another country that is really frustrating to me, and that's India. How many of you have noticed or heard about the counter notifications that the U.S. has filed against India at the WTO? How many? I want to see hands in the air. Oh, well, the crowd. I did this the other day and I didn't get any hands in the air, so that's why I asked the question. So we've done counter notifications on rice, wheat, cotton, chickpeas, pigeon peas, mung beans, whatever that is, and lentils. I can't even, what is that?
I don't know. Matpy?
We have a situation where on rice, China's exceeded what it told the WTO its subsidies were. We went and looked on its own FAS, and FAS folks, that probably some of them in the room that worked on that, went and looked at that, and their subsidies were 7 or 8 times what they said that were in the WTO. And they were 6 or 7 times what they said they were. What's interesting about this that you might find curious is that India is now the biggest rice exporter in the world. And by the way, we see here just today, Dan, that India is talking about exporting wheat. Wait a minute. If you're violating your WTO commitment by that much to a point where you've created such a pile, just like what happened in China, I think we have to have an ability to deal with this and cope with this in this kind of setting. Quickly, I've got just a couple minutes left. On USMCA, the simple pitch there is that everything in that agreement is the same or better than what it was. I don't care what industry you're talking about, agriculture, labor, etc. And for agriculture, we know how important this is. And personally, I think I'm pretty optimistic. We have 248 new members of the House since we did the last trade vote with Korea in early 2012. It's just a matter of education, folks. Shoe leather up on the hill. And I am very proud of agriculture and what you've done so far in that regard. You've all done an unbelievable job. We just have to figure out a way to bring this thing home. On Japan, clearly an important topic. This relationship we have with Japan and food and agriculture goes back decades. It's very, very important to all of us. It's a huge market for us. And hopefully, these conversations are going on above my pay grade, so I'm just going to leave it at that, shall we say? But I do want to reserve a little time, Constance, for the EU today.
Yeah.
Shocking that I might want to do that.
Duck.
Yes.
I'm just warning them.
Yeah,
so,
they should, yeah. The first thing that I would note that has really surprised me in this conversation, and I think it surprised the Europeans when we dug this up the other day or found this on a website. You realize since from 2014 to 2017, the EU has funding, or the allocation for funding for NGOs, take a stab at what that is, what that number is. 11 billion euros. 11 billion euros that the EU has given to NGOs in that period of time. That's unbelievable to me. An interesting, I looked this up the other day, Ted, we were talking about this. You realize in the last 10 years, the time period in China and in Europe to get a biotech approval has doubled? Mm-hmm. But here's where I'm going to end this today, is this conversation that Julia knows about that occurred here about 3 weeks or so ago between the EU and the US on pesticides. And, we won't go into chlorinated chicken or hormone beef today, but I do want to talk about this pesticide issue. There was a great conversation back and forth, and the conversation got to a point where I said, Europe, if you ban the new technology that's easier on the environment, this is going to result in farmers using the older technology that's harder on the environment. And the European reaction to that was, oh yeah, we're going to ban that too. And in fact, the Europeans went on to say, yeah, we think that there are 3 things that ought to be able to be used for insecticides, pesticides: milk, vinegar, and beer. Why do you laugh? They're dead serious. Now, my reaction to that was, number one, how do you get the beer if you don't have insecticides for the barley and the hops?
I don't know, I'd like to try though.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And of course, number 2 is, I guess milk just comes from a grocery store. I don't require anything agriculturally related to produce that either. All I can say is Julia has the toughest job I know in dealing with the Europeans when it comes to agriculture. We've all dealt with the Europeans in agriculture for most of our careers here. My level of frustration is beyond an ability to describe, with the inability of Europe to understand what we use in terms of technology today. And given this combination with the NGOs, the question was asked, well, don't you talk to your farmers about these pesticides? And their answer was no. because they get subsidies. They have no say. I think I'll just end it right there, Constance.
Okay. Thank you. If I could, before you start, Ted, quick question, Greg. Have you had the conversation with some of our trading partners where we're dealing with technology about the risk of doing nothing, about the risk of not having technologies?
Well, I have had the conversation this way, is the fact that you have to understand that the U.S. farmer, when he wakes up in the morning, he's thinking about how to feed 9 billion plus people by 2050. That's how that's how we think. And how do we safely and adopt and have the use of technology to do that? Now, I realize not all farmers in the world are interested in that. But what I don't understand is the fact that we have a regulatory system that is extraordinary, that in a lot of ways is the envy of the world, and our ability to do this and also to regulate it. And I think, quite frankly, that's where we have a lot of work to do in the world, is with regard to, number one, understanding, helping people in the world, other governments in the world understand what a risk assessment is, and I heard that talked about earlier. But this other concept of risk communication is, I think, something where all farmers, and especially the Farm Foundation, can play a huge role.
Thank you. Ted, tell us a little bit about market development and codex.
Well, let me
if you
just give some opening thoughts here first and then get right into that.
would. Okay.
First, Mike, kudos to you and the Farm Foundation for putting on this yet another good forum. Long admirer of Farm Foundation, and it's clear by the attendees here that you're knocking this thing out of the park, so just keep it up. And thanks for inviting us on. Greg, always good to be a partner of yours and be here on the stage with you. I just want to leave you with 5 key points, and then there's a bonus here. And this might tee up some of these other questions that you have. I come at this as a vintage Midwesterner, pretty happy. In my Senate confirmation, I said I wanted to be a happy warrior, happy because we're all in agriculture, and how could you not enjoy that world? And I do. Warrior in the sense that there's a lot to be done to sort of try to fix trade. But I have to give you a conclusion here this many months in, that no, there is not free, fair, and reciprocal trade around the world. It is not. Not free, fair, and reciprocal trade, if that's our goal, and that is my goal. Secondly, there's no doubt there's a lot of disruption in trade, and some of that is created here by us. But the cause is just to try to straighten this out. Otherwise, our children and our grandchildren are not going to be able to ever achieve free, fair, and reciprocal trade. Point 3, I will not get into depth. I think Greg adequately covered China, Japan, USMC, and others. But these are clearly the very, very big, most important ones we need to land, and I hope that we can land them quickly. And I am more cautiously optimistic than not on all 3. Yes, USDA is busting its buns to try to do these 3 major areas right. I hope you'll be proud of the interagency work on all these negotiations, whether it's in Beijing or whether they here, on the 8 or 9 digital video conferences, oftentimes starting at 6 a.m. or 7 p.m., going for several hours. My team happily is right there with Greg and Sharon and Julia back there, and we outnumber them 2 or 3 to 1, and happy to do that. I hope I share that so that you know that the interagency process can and does work. Now, these are technical expertise. We're not doing the negotiation. That's the job given very capably to Greg and Sharon and the team, but happy to be there with the techno facts when those are needed during the conversation. So I hope you see that we're fully cinched up, shoulder to shoulder, to try to get these right. The next one, I hope that you are seeing the vision fulfilled that so many of you asked for when the 2014 Farm Bill passed, and you didn't force, but you created for the Secretary of Ag the opportunity to have this standalone Undersecretary for Trade. To remind you, predecessors, really, really good predecessors like Michael Skews. I remember J.B. Penn so well. Dick Crowder was in that role, sort of, one of the best out there. That you had domestic programs and you had international programs. My goodness, I don't know how they did it. Now, they had deputy undersecretaries, really terrific people like Darcy Vetter, who I just have the most admiration for. But I got to tell you, notwithstanding our rather humble Midwestern roots, around the world, your title means something. I don't get it. I don't care about it. I'm about getting the job done. But sometimes your title gets you in to see somebody that might make a difference. And if that's what it takes, I'm up for it. And I hope we're fulfilling the vision, because I read all 30 or so letters that many of your organizations and you individuals wrote. And just for bonus, I want to just highlight the interagency process, that it's working as well as I think it can. Mostly, I think USTR and USDA. And just for good measure, we throw Commerce in there as well. I'll start there and then go to the Q&A.